Thank you all for coming. I'm very delighted that you're here. So we wanted an event that would take blended learning beyond the hype. What is the buzz? Is it useful for us, blended learning? How can we use it? When is it useful? When isn't it? And this is what we are going to discuss with you. The thing that pops to mind most is trying to combine online and offline learning. My question to you is, why should we use blended learning? And of course also, why not? Whip out your phone and go to this URL or take a picture. If you have an iPhone, you don't even have to have a special program. You can just open your camera and look at this QR code and you will be redirected.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's so cool.
Wait, what do I do?
Yeah, it's just this, and then it pops off over here.
Oh, that's brilliant!
All of your comments will show up here.
Well, basically, I just created two different things right now, and I'm going to type, for example, why blended learning. So maybe it's, for example, for student engagement. So if I can actually type on my phone with my sliced finger, I was cutting ginger, I can do this, and then you'll actually see engagement is listed here. So you guys can actually make your own, you can add to it, or you can actually edit in here.
So why should you invest a lot of effort in creating a blended learning course if you only have, say, 15 students in your class?
To teach more effectively, that it can be complicated, tough with a small class size. This is actually a really good app also to use in classroom when you're trying to actually get students to sort of collaborate, but maybe don't feel comfortable talking out loud yet, and they maybe feel a little introspective or a little shy. You can actually use this so everyone has a chance to have their own ideas, and then you as a teacher can kind of move things around and kind of find themes. It works pretty well in the classroom.
And you said to me that actually every one of us uses some form of blended learning, so maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, it was interesting, because when we were talking about doing this, my first question actually to the group was, well, what is blended learning? Actually, because I was even feeling myself, I keep hearing this term and I'm not really sure. I actually asked, I said, am I doing blended learning? Is that how my class, am I doing it? And what does that look like? And we started talking about what we're doing in our classroom and whether, and the way, for example, we're even using Canvas, for example, where students are completing some assignments at home, that could be considered blended learning, for example. The assignments we send, what we expect them to prepare in advance in order to augment our classroom. If we send videos or if we post things and say, watch this ahead of time, watch this TED Talk, watch this video about a experiment or something like that, and then it uses it to kind of bridge the conversation. A lot of times we're already doing it, and I think that, at least for me, this buzzword or this term has come up, and I've been asking, should I be doing something different? Should I be doing something more? Am I doing something wrong in my classroom? And what we were talking a little bit about is how do we define it? And in some ways, we're actually maybe already doing it. And there may be less, and it's a lot of hype and that we should do it more. We might actually already be doing it. And there may be places where it doesn't make sense. And there may be little opportunities for us to change that. So in our conversations, the way this idea came about, because we were throwing around the idea of what a workshop might look like, we said, well, it would be really cool to look at a class and just get an idea of what somebody's doing and point out when they're already doing it and when there's opportunities for more and when it doesn't really necessarily need it.
If there are any questions in the audience, just ask them.
So I have a question. What exactly is the difference between just using digital media for like being prepared for your class or reading up on a certain subject and really blended teaching or blended learning?
What do people think? Actually, I would love to hear other people's thoughts on this.
Not blended?
Maybe. We're all
Come on,
here,
bring
actually.
it to the front. We have it in the front here.
When we use digital tools to do what we always did, but just replacing it with something digital, like read a book or read an ebook, I don't feel that's really blended. It becomes blended, I think, more when we think about the digital opportunities before we design our course and then implement them in the design. That's when the blended has become fully mature.
Any remarks on this?
What I think so far is that it requires some kind of interaction in the class itself. So doing a PA, a preparatory assignment before, is in my mind not really blended. But in the class itself and discussing it with a tool like that is blended, in my opinion.
In my opinion, a tool like this is not augmenting off-campus versus on-campus education. Is just using a digital tool in your class, which is cool by itself, of course, but it's not really bridging the gap between what students are doing at home and what they take to the classroom and what you are doing in the classroom.
Do people agree that that's one of the goals of blended learning? I mean, this is what we see written about, to sort of blend offline, the home environment or the non-classroom environment and the classroom environment, to really stretch this further. Do people sort of agree with that as a working definition?
I think you put your aim quite high then.
Yeah.
Because you could just say, let's use the available ICT to get most of the possible combination of offline and online education. That would be already quite satisfactory to me, but I think your aim is even better and higher.
Within my own course that I gave, I started replacing pen and paper kinds of learning tools with digital variants of them, but that was in 2005. And every year I took a little bit, made it a bit better, and then the knowledge sharing clips came along, and we made some knowledge sharing clips and we put it in there. And so if you look at it that way, then what we're doing now is at least more blended than we did in 2005. I took over that course from somebody who had a manual, and the education was, here's your manual with tasks in them. Here are your floppy disks, which you have to put into your Macintosh computer, and then you have to do the assignments together behind the computer in class. And so I took literally the text, put it in an assessment, took the files from floppy disk and put them also in the assessment, and then gradually made the transition. Look at how your course is structured at this point. Slowly try to see how you can augment your classes and go gradually. So that's the point that I want to make for today.
I really liked your point that you raised, because you said that there's sort of, it's a matter if you're starting from scratch or not, right? So if you're developing a new course, I think one of the things we hear is the idea of blended learning. What we generally feel an agreed upon working definition is that we're really trying to sort of connect the classroom to outside spaces, right? To kind of remind the students and have them practicing this content in another space. Greater repetition, greater reinforcement of the content, and richer connections, and actually hopefully a more engaged class space as well because of it. And I think we've all done that in some ways as teachers. This is what homework has been for in some ways, right? It's a connection. So we've always been doing this. But we're trying to think about the digital opportunities of that and what this digital space may afford to us. And I think you're right. If you're creating a new class from scratch, having that at the very onset, it's almost easier. Yes, we're trying to think about ways that we might use digital technologies to help us connect these two spaces. But it's also, if you have a working class, it's not something that will happen overnight.
The question is also, do your students get better when you incorporate blended learning or blended teaching?
We hope they learn from it.
But so the thing is that I want to address is that you do have to think about, will they get better grades? We have to manage large amount of students, so using some form of blended learning, digital learning, we can offload a lot of the work, so the points you made earlier, to video, and we don't have to address those points again in the lectures, and we can focus our lectures on more interaction with the students. So using blended learning for us also gives an opportunity to try and go deeper into the materials that we want to teach our students. The question here is how do you guarantee that the students actually watch the materials?
How does anybody guarantee this at all? Anybody have any examples in the audience?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I know this was in Canvas, but sometimes you can really see which student did what. So you can have it that it reports back to you, so then you can make sure. Then you can also incorporate another quiz in the end, which they have to fill in based on the material that they're supposed to know. So there are ways that you can make sure.
If we have budget cuts, then you do have to find a way as a teacher to manage what you have to teach, and sometimes you have to throw out stuff, and we don't want that. But if we can think of smart ways to try and offload our instruction to videos, so we don't have to do that again and again, then don't have to sacrifice the quality of our teachings.
It's not about shrinking my course so much, it's that when they're in the room together, I value that as a slightly different space. And so sometimes, for example, it may be that I teach more smaller classes. So it's also, I think, very dependent upon class size. So for example, my classes, I teach a lot of graduate electives with about 25 students, and they work in groups. I actually want that moment when they're in the classroom sometimes for them to be spending a little bit of time working in their groups and me going to group by group and kind of understanding how they're tackling the topic. But that means that they need to have had some basic information that I'm assuming that they've done at home in order so that that moment when I have those 5 together and me, I can sort of use that as well and they have that base knowledge. So there's sort of it depends on how I'm using the classroom, and that's when for me, something that I have them look at home can be actually very valuable. So in some ways, when we were sitting down talking about what is blended learning, I was actually comforted to realize occasionally I am blending better than I knew. I mean, there's places for improvement, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm not so far off on this as well. So if one thing that we leave with is realizing we're probably doing more than we think, even if we didn't call it that way, it might be encouraging to all of us because we're all kind of working very hard in a relatively restricted situation right now, and we feel that push and that tightness, so also look at that.